We're live, Kelley. And welcome everyone for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate it. And what are we discussing? Legal mistakes that stop emerging franchisors from scaling. So, this is all about preparing for 2026. How are we going to scale and grow? And is your current FDD, is your current legal structure holding you back? And, Kelley, if we could start the conversation, we're having so many of these conversations now. And if I could just frame up some of the conversations we're having, which is, hey guys, I franchised 2 years ago. I have my FDD. I've already invested in it. I may have spent a good amount of money on a development company. During the past 2 years, I hired some companies to do some franchise sales marketing. I feel like I've had good conversations with leads, but the amount of leads we're getting relative to our conversions, they're just not connecting. We're not closing the right amount of deals. We're not scaling. And as we're having those conversations, Kelley, I think sometimes the last thing they expect is sort of like the tail wagging the dog, where their wrong legal structure is misaligning their marketing.
Yeah.
Just if you could share with us, what have those conversations been like?
Yeah, you're right. We've had quite a few of them lately. And I think the majority of those, have been inadvertent on the franchisor, certainly like side, misrepresentation of what they're offering. One of the conversations, that we had yesterday, Charles, was particularly about what type of brand are you actually selling? Is this an income replacement or is this a supplemental brand? Like that's one I think that we see it's not really clearly identified in the legal documents. Territory structure is certainly one of those as well. That again and again we see that people are misrepresenting their territories and the expectations of the franchisees based on that.
Well, I think it all leads to, Kelley, it leads to confusion, and it's, hey, I'm not closing these deals. And to your point, guys, what we're seeing is that the confusion in the structure of what you're offering, it leaks into your marketing and your sales presentation. So an example being, if you're, say, a business that could be part-time, or for some people full-time and others part-time, well, how does it reflect in your FDD? And to Kelley's point, what is the opportunity profile you're offering? So if you're a restaurant, you're a retail brick and mortar, you want to live in the income replacement category, right? We could replace your income, potentially legacy building. That's going to have an impact on how your item 19 is structured, how your territory structure is set up, and even what your fees look like, your royalties and other items. If you're a different type of business, say you're a home service business, or you're a retail business that could be part-time, where do you fit in the franchise landscape as an opportunity? And so we're seeing some confusion there, which leads to misaligned FDDs. And part of the point of today's live stream, which is legal mistakes. So if I could frame it out there, let's identify some of the biggest legal mistakes. The most basic, and we won't go through it too much, is FDD compliance. Your FDD, your registrations, they're not compliant, sort of become ticking time bombs for the future. Two is weak item 19. And when I say weak here, I'm not referring to the strength of your numbers. I'm referring to the depth of the information you're providing. And to Kelley's earlier point, well, if we're a restaurant, our item 19 needs to focus on core fundamentals, right? Income replacement, ROI potential, certainly gross sales, food costs, labor costs, gross profit. But if you're in a different category, if you're in a supplemental income category with the potential for income replacement, well, then you need deeper dive item 19. What are some KPIs? Maybe your item 19 story is not all about gross sales, but maybe it's about profitability or direct labor cost. Or if it's, say, in a food service category, say it's a food truck or a venue driven food type, what is your revenue per event? So you have to think at a granular level and go deeper. So compliance, item 19, which then gets to structure. How are we aligning on territory royalties? and everything you're offering the franchisees. So, Kelley, how? I mean, the conversations are so many. Um, what's some advice you have for brands? I mean, when you were growing your company, how did you look at, and now in retrospect, maybe things you weren't looking at, how did you look at year-end planning in terms of your FDD? And also, how did you look at your offering in terms of category and what you're offering your franchisees?
Yeah, so one in retrospect, I would have been looking at a lot of different things. Talked about, we looked at revenues, we looked at number of packages sold, we looked at, these really kind of high level KPIs that everyone, expects to look at. But what we didn't do was tell a full story and set. For example, we were a mobile concept, and we might have someone who has two franchisees that each have one territory. One franchisee is doing 600,000 a year. One is doing 200,000 a year. On paper, both of those numbers are like, okay, most people are like, well, one person's, clearly struggling, but they really weren't. One location had one vehicle, one location had 5 vehicles. Had we shown that in the item 19, someone would have got the better story of, if I want to scale and if I want to be the franchisee that's at 600,000, the expectation is I have 5 vehicles on the road, not one. And so I think, within that, there are so many opportunities, like especially just in mobile concepts, not just how many territories do they have, but how many vehicles are on the road, how many technicians have they hired, how many events have they done this year. So people can really understand the scalability of the territories and the expectations of success in those spaces, right? You don't just get to buy 250,000 people and here's the outcome. And so I think there's, a lot of additional tables and information I would have shared. And a lot of our franchisors, I feel like, are starting to see this, right? How to better set up expectations for future franchisees.
Well, and especially for the emerging brands, Kelley, one of the common statements we hear is, well, I have my FDD already, as if it's some set in stone document. And many of them don't realize it's holding them back, right? The connections. And so for everyone listening to this live stream or participating, if you guys have questions, feel free, to engage. Just think about, what are you offering to your franchise buyers? And one example Kelley and I have been using during our conversations is, if your franchise were a product you took off a shelf, there's a box and it's XYZ franchise and someone's buying it, what's inside that box, right? And in many ways, inside of it are legal components. We're giving them a license to use a trademark, not a big deal there, but they want to see, what's inside the box. What does the territory look like? What are my opportunities in terms of sales? What are my obligations? How does this all come together? And how are we going to tie everything together to a story of ROI or investment opportunity? Meaning, when someone looks at your FDD and they look at item 5 for your initial fees, item 6 for your ongoing fee structure, item 12 for your territory, how does that all come together with the story you're telling on your website? The opportunity you're offering your franchisees. If you're a restaurant, what is the ROI story or potential there, where a sophisticated investor can look at it and say, okay, based on this item 19 and these fee structures, I could project recovering my investment in 3 to 4 years. If you're a service business, what are those other fundamentals look like? So the key strategy here as you go into 2026 is, I would look at your website itself. What is our franchise opportunity, right? What are the 3 uniques we're offering our franchisee candidates? And then how does this all validate in your FDD itself, your item 19 and the other structures you're putting together? What do you think, Kelley?
I agree. I think, we see a lot of disconnect. And, one of the conversations we had this week was very similar. I use an example. If I'm selling snow cones in the Northeast, and so I'm only operating 4 months out of the year, and my item 19 shows numbers that are only 4 months out of the year, it doesn't tell you that. You're like, oh, that person didn't do that. Wonderful. But you're not understanding I'm only working 4 months out of the year. Then you pop over to my website and it's like, leave your corporate job, come do something fun. You're selling income replacement there, not a part-time, right? But your FDD is telling the story of a part-time business, but your website's telling the story of income replacement. And so, I think oftentimes we see that misalignment, and particularly when we have franchisors who are working with marketing companies or development companies that are building the website on just attracting leads and making, sales, not necessarily on telling the actual story. And so, as franchisors, I think we have a lot of responsibility for making sure that our messaging matches. And hopefully everyone, has an amazing legal team that's pointing out when it doesn't.
Well, and to the item 19, what we'll hear often is, I didn't think I could do that, or no one brought that up. So, the advice there, as you evaluate your item 19, think about this past year. What were important discussion points that came up during the franchise sales process? What was information you wish you could have shared, right? Is there a story that has to do with your square footage, your sales, your profitability? And really focus in on expanding your item 19. To Kelley's earlier example, this is more for service categories, or supplemental income businesses. Many times clients will come and say, I'm frustrated because we have high performers who treat this as a full-time job. And then we have low performers, but they're only performing low because they're not full-time. How do we address this? And to Kelley's earlier example, deeper dive metrics, right? So if it's a concession type business or event driven business, in addition to sales data and other data, start disclosing how many events, average, median, high, and low for events, or number of service vehicles, because that'll give franchisee candidates insights into, okay, well, high performers are doing this, but they're also spending a certain amount on marketing and they're attending a certain number of events. And so now I understand why the high performers here and the low performers there, and they could calibrate, which really gets to expectations, and alignment of expectations with your franchisees. As franchise lawyers, I think the biggest cause for litigation with franchisees is misalignment. A franchisee comes in, or a candidate comes in, they have certain expectations. What causes litigation is where the expectations don't align.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, franchisees could fail and maybe they understand that and it doesn't cause litigation, but where they misunderstand the opportunity, that's where litigation comes in. Most basic level, something no one's going to do on this conversation, if you give information that goes beyond your item 19, right? So even if you feel like it's helpful data and valuable data, by doing that, you expose yourself to litigation. And the question there is, why not then spend the time now to disclose that information? The other area where there's misaligned expectations comes, we see it often where maybe it is a seasonal business, or maybe it's a business that right now is only supplemental income, but you sell it as if it's income replacement, and it's still not proven yet. And now your franchisee candidate is borrowing money, 401k, SBA, making promises to his or her wife or spouse. And now all of a sudden they're now becoming a guinea pig. Maybe your model's not ready to support it. Whereas if you took that person in and they only expected supplemental income but hit a home run, well, it's a win-win. So you really want to align franchise buyer expectations. And this is where I'd recommend look at your website right now. What are the substantive things, the value your franchise offers? What makes it unique in the marketplace? And then is that validated in your FDD itself on how you set things up? And this could have to do with how your royalties are set up, minimum royalty structures. For many businesses, conversations we hear often, Charles, these franchisees are not succeeding because they're not investing the right amount of capital in initial marketing. And so then maybe you should be considering now for your FDD um, higher estimates for initial marketing, or something I'd suggest evaluating, which is um, maybe as franchisor requiring that they pay you the upfront marketing that you deploy over the next 6 months. So those are some of the things you should be thinking about now. Kelley, and we just came back from our FranCamp conference in Miami, which, guys, if you haven't been to, and definitely find out more about FranCamp. I know you've had so many conversations. What are some of the items also that you're seeing or popping up in your one-on-one conversations with brands?
I think there's been a lot of item 19 discussions, particularly coming out of FranCamp Miami, which was an amazing couple of days. But there was a lot of discussion in that camp around unit economics and sharing unit economics and how to drive those throughout the year. So a lot of the conversations, I've been having recently with franchisors are, what one, everyone's kind of looking at what were our numbers for 2025 because it's that time. But those conversations have been, what should our goal be for 2026? And I'm like getting really excited that people are starting to, look at that and instead of just waiting till 2025, the end of the year, to evaluate what were our unit economics, thinking forward now, or what are the drivers and how can we improve what our item 19 looks like next year? Because 2027's work really needs to start now. And so that's been a lot of those conversations. And to your earlier point, like what can we show in the item 19? How can we better tell our story? So definitely a lot of people paying more attention to that right now.
Yeah, Kelley, connected to that also was, I think, a realization by emerging brands. And we had some really great speakers, founders that exited. And it seemed like time and again, those founders that have exited and grown, they were 100% focused on those franchisee unit economics. But I think a surprise for me was how many emerging brands were not leveraging the data of their franchisees, of compiling the data, having those KPI points, and also sharing it with the other franchisees in the system and allowing them to see where they are, and how they could benchmark. And it struck me that that's a big weakness for emerging brands. So if right now you're not sharing or benchmarking data in your franchise system, I think you're missing out on a big opportunity. Number one, it's going to force a cadence where you're coaching your franchisees toward that financial performance. So it's going to make your franchise system more effective. Also, it's just changing the culture in terms of reporting and KPIs. But it's also going to prepare you and make your item 19 better. Kelley, how did you, like, when you worked with your franchisees, how did you use internal data? And did you show it to the other franchisees? What was the effect of all that?
Yeah, no. And we absolutely should have. That's, one of those things, like, back, looking back, I would have done much differently. And we had so much data, to your point. Like we, our CRM provided so much data. And really, I think the only time, we really dug into it and plugged in, was when someone was struggling. Like, let's really dive into your data. Let's dive into your KPIs and try to fix what's wrong. Instead of also looking at what's right, diving into the KPIs and the data of the people that were doing really well, and using that to kind of, shift what we're doing system wide. And I think so many of us, and I was one of them, would get like this analysis paralysis. Like there's too much data. I don't know what to do with it. But now, especially now in the day of like AI and Chat GPT, there's no excuse not to just dump all that data into the, and ask them to help you analyze it if you don't know how to analyze it yourself.
Yeah, and from a franchisee perspective, you think about it, I'm part of a system. I think one of the biggest assets are, I have others out there, let me see what they're benchmarking, how they're performing, and creates that ecosystem. So for sure, that's something we see as a common thread and an opportunity. So guys, and to legal points, FDD compliance, you need to get it right. Start planning right now for your registrations for 2026. Consider if you have deals in queue, you're going to have a dark period. So when your new FDD is issued, whether it's January, February, March, April, when that FDD is issued, you're now dark in the registration states. Your old FDD that was disclosed, it's no longer effective. You're going to have to redisclose candidates in the pipeline. So you want to close your deals that are pending now, and you want to plan out with your legal counsel when we're going to go dark, when our renewal applications go in, and you want to get that timing right. So you cut down on the dark period, you close your deals, and you light everything back up in the registration states. I'd focus on that. Item 19, don't just repeat what you did last year. Challenge what you did last year. I would recommend, for legal protection purposes, focus on clearer definitions, really challenge how you're presenting data. Make sure the data is representative. We're seeing people come to us where they're showing data, but I'm like, but you're operating 20 trucks. That may not be representative. So make sure your data is representative, and then challenge, it's not just a fixed process. Consider deeper dive KPIs, questions people are asking you in the process. You could go granular, value per customer transaction, repeat customers, deeper dive, answer the questions that brokers are going to have and candidates are going to have. On structure, territory, royalties, make sure it aligns with the opportunity. If you're in a lower startup cost business, supplemental income, I'm not a fan of sales quotas for 1,000 reasons. If your FDD has sales quotas but not minimum royalties, speak with your legal counsel about why minimum royalties may be better. Number one, it forms a bedrock for your franchise system of that stable income. Two, it's self-policing. If someone's not performing, they're just going to come to you and say, I don't want to pay minimum royalties. I want to give back territory, versus you going after them, defaulting them for not hitting sales quotas and running into legal issues. Franchisee expectations, as you're scaling up in 2026, make sure your item 7 has a lot of clarity. Don't underestimate. Be clear about your estimated your investment required for initial marketing that first 6 months, and really align the expectations with franchisees. We're seeing a lot where they're not getting the local marketing right, and some franchisors don't have a game plan, and that's where relationships can break down. And then to the point that we started with, or Kelley brought up, think of your opportunity profile. And if you're a restaurant or brick and mortar retail, that's easy. Income replacement, legacy building. If you're in service categories, lower startup cost, make sure your item 19 aligns with what you're offering on your website and your franchise presentation. Those items should all be aligned. And of course, the key is avoiding litigation. I can tell you, franchisee attorneys, they look for low-hanging fruit. They want things to be easy. So you want your FDD prepared the right way. You need to be registered. You want to honor your obligations and what you're representing in item 19, the FDD, but also just simple things, your FDD delivery, maintaining your receipts, and following a disciplined process. Guys, any questions? Glad to answer them. If you haven't been to our Fran Camp event, definitely reach out to Kelley. I think our next event's not until June, but it'll be a great event, and we have a bunch of coaching programs that are in process. So always feel free to reach out. Any last words, Kelley?
Yeah, I just encourage everybody to remember the franchising world is such a collaborative one. This is not the time of year to put your head down, power through those FDD worksheets, and just fire them back and sign off whatever's sent back to you. Schedule a strategy call with your legal team. Reach out to some people in your peer groups. Ask them to take a peek at your item 7, your item 19, and see if there's anything that they might have added or any opportunities missed. outside perspective is so important, and this is a really good time to lean on other people to get that help.
Kelley, that's great advice. And guys, we appreciate you joining us, and we've had fun, and we're going to have a lot more plans for 2026, Kelley and I and our team. And so if we don't see you guys, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Thank you.